Have you ever witnessed an act of heroism that unleashed something beyond human comprehension? Where good intentions triggered consequences that defied all prediction? Deep in Gabon's rainforests, a conservationist's desperate mission to help a gorilla save its baby from a massive python would lead to a reaction so terrifying, so completely unexpected, that it challenged everything experts believed about primate behavior and proved that sometimes, even the most noble acts can awaken forces we never imagined possible.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Deep within Gabon's Lopé National Park, where ancient rainforests stretch endlessly toward the Atlantic's distant horizon, lies one of Central Africa's most pristine wilderness sanctuaries. This UNESCO World Heritage Site encompasses thousands of square kilometers of untouched jungle where towering okoumé trees create living cathedrals beneath canopies so dense that sunlight penetrates in scattered golden beams. The forest floor pulses with life, carpeted in decomposing leaves that release the rich, earthy scent of centuries-old growth cycles, feeding this incredible biodiversity hotspot. Crystal-clear streams wind through valleys wrapped in perpetual mist, their gentle flow mixing with the haunting calls of hornbills and the distant crashes of western lowland gorillas navigating ancient territorial boundaries. Massive buttress roots create natural fortresses where countless species find sanctuary, while delicate wild orchids bloom in impossible colors along branches that have supported life for millennia. But Lopé also harbors secrets that challenge our understanding of the complex relationships between humans and our closest evolutionary relatives. This is a place where the impossible becomes reality, where acts of compassion can trigger responses that transcend every scientific prediction about primate psychology. In these mystical depths, where gorilla families have adapted to human research presence over generations, the most well-intentioned interventions can unleash consequences beyond human comprehension or control. What was about to unfold in this pristine wilderness would prove that sometimes the most heroic acts of interspecies cooperation can awaken primal instincts that have remained dormant for generations, demonstrating that even the gentlest creatures possess capabilities that defy our understanding of their nature. This was a story that would challenge fundamental assumptions about gorilla behavior and reveal that beneath their peaceful exterior lies something far more complex and potentially terrifying than science had ever imagined. The extraordinary events that were about to transform both human and gorilla would prove that in nature's most desperate moments, when good intentions collide with ancient instincts, heroes can unintentionally unleash forces that leave everyone questioning the wisdom of intervention and the terrifying power that lies dormant within even the most gentle hearts.
Working in the dangerous front lines of Gabon's primate research was Dr. Antoine Mbongo, a Gabonese primatologist whose 14-year mission to study western lowland gorilla behavior had earned him both international recognition and the complex trust of gorilla families who had learned to tolerate his presence within their territories. Standing just over 6 feet with powerful hands bearing scars from countless encounters with wild primates, his dark eyes reflected the accumulated wisdom of someone who understood that gorillas possessed emotional and intellectual complexity that most humans never imagined. Dr. Mbongo operated from a semi-permanent research camp that served as both observation post and emergency medical facility, equipped with specialized gorilla monitoring equipment alongside traditional field research supplies. His fluent command of regional languages and deep understanding of local ecological systems had allowed him to establish long-term relationships with gorilla families that other researchers couldn't achieve, creating opportunities to study behaviors that remained hidden from casual observation. But it was his personal connection to individual gorillas that made his work both extraordinary and dangerous. Having spent over a decade observing the same family groups, Dr. Mbongo understood that these magnificent creatures possessed emotional lives as complex as human relationships, making every interaction a delicate balance between scientific observation and genuine interspecies friendship that occasionally blurred professional boundaries. Deep within the research territory that Dr. Mbongo had been monitoring lived Kondo, a 12-year-old male western lowland gorilla whose name meant warrior in Fang, a fitting tribute to his role as the family's most protective member, despite not yet being the dominant silverback. Standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing over 300 pounds, Kondo's imposing frame was balanced by remarkably intelligent eyes that reflected both gentle wisdom and barely contained power. Kondo's family included his mate Naya and their 18-month-old son Bomani, whose playful nature and curious intelligence had made him a favorite subject for Dr. Mbongo's behavioral studies. The young gorilla's fearless exploration of his environment and remarkable learning abilities suggested cognitive development that challenged assumptions about primate intelligence and emotional complexity. This combination of protective instinct and remarkable intelligence would prove crucial to the terrifying events about to unfold, events that would reveal hidden aspects of gorilla nature that science was completely unprepared to understand or predict.
That misty Saturday morning settled peacefully over Lopé's pristine canopy, with golden sunlight filtering through layers of emerald foliage as Dr. Mbongo conducted his weekly behavioral observation survey from his concealed research blind overlooking Kondo's family territory. The converted platform sat perfectly positioned 30 feet above the forest floor, providing clear sightlines while maintaining the respectful distance that had allowed him to study gorilla behavior without disrupting their natural routines. The primatologist had settled into his routine documentation with the methodical precision of someone whose work had become both scientific calling and personal passion. His weathered hands moved efficiently between camera equipment and field notes, while his trained eyes tracked the subtle social interactions that revealed the complex emotional lives of his subjects. These morning observation sessions had become sacred ritual, moments of profound connection with our closest evolutionary relatives that reminded him why gorilla conservation was worth the personal risks and professional challenges that defined his isolated existence in one of Africa's most remote wilderness areas. 300 meters below his observation platform, Kondo's family had begun their daily foraging routine with the unhurried rhythm that characterized their peaceful existence in this protected territory. The massive gorilla sat beneath his favorite ironwood tree, methodically processing wild ginger roots while keeping one watchful eye on young Bomani's increasingly adventurous exploration of the forest understory. Naya had positioned herself strategically where she could monitor both her infant's safety and the surrounding forest for any signs of potential threats, her maternal instincts finely tuned after 18 months of successfully raising their precocious offspring in an environment filled with natural dangers. Her gentle, rumbling communications with Bomani created a soundtrack of familial contentment that embodied everything beautiful about gorilla social bonds. The forest soundscape was quintessentially Central African, the melodic calls of gray parrots echoing through the misty canopy, the distant splash of forest elephants at hidden mineral licks, and the gentle rustle of leaves as countless creatures went about their morning routines in perfect harmony with their ancient environment. It was the kind of perfect morning that represented the timeless rhythm of life in Lopé, a moment of pure tranquility where both researcher and subjects existed in peaceful coexistence, unaware that this serene scene was about to explode into chaos that would challenge everything Dr. Mbongo thought he understood about gorilla nature.
Dr. Mbongo's peaceful morning observation was suddenly shattered by sounds that sent ice through his veins. high-pitched gorilla distress calls, cutting through the forest silence with the unmistakable tone of genuine terror. The vocalizations were coming from Kondo's family territory, but these weren't the typical warning calls used for territorial disputes or minor threats. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was something far more desperate, more primal. The calls continued in frantic bursts, growing more anguished with each passing moment. Through his binoculars, Dr. Mbongo could see Kondo and Naya moving with the explosive urgency that gorillas displayed only in life-threatening emergencies. Their massive frames crashed through the undergrowth, with complete abandonment of their usual careful, deliberate movements. Following the heartbreaking sounds with growing alarm, Dr. Mbongo began rapidly descending from his observation platform, his 14 years of gorilla research having taught him to distinguish between normal family communications and genuine crisis situations. What he was hearing fell squarely into the latter category, and the intensity suggested that young Bomani was in mortal danger. As he moved carefully through the dense vegetation toward the source of the distress calls, additional sounds began filtering through the humid air that made his blood freeze with recognition, the distinctive hissing and movement patterns of a large python in active hunting mode. These weren't the sounds of a serpent avoiding contact, but the aggressive vocalizations of a predator that had successfully cornered prey. Through gaps in the foliage, he began to catch glimpses of a small clearing ahead where a massive fallen tree had created natural amphitheater surrounded by dense jungle. The gorilla distress calls were definitely coming from that direction, mixed now with sounds that suggested a prolonged struggle between primate family and serpentine predator. Dr. Mbongo found himself facing a crisis that challenged every principle of wildlife research ethics. His professional training dictated non-interference with natural predator-prey relationships, but his personal connection to this gorilla family was triggering protective responses that had nothing to do with scientific protocols. The increasingly desperate nature of Kondo and Naya's calls indicated that whatever was happening was reaching a critical phase where intervention might mean the difference between life and death for young Bomani, forcing Dr. Mbongo to choose between professional obligations and moral imperatives that were about to collide in the most dramatic way possible.
As Dr. Mbongo crept through the final barrier of dense vegetation, the scene that greeted him was every primatologist's worst nightmare. There, trapped in the center of the natural clearing, was 18-month-old Bomani, the playful infant gorilla he had been studying since birth, now caught in the deadly coils of an enormous African rock python that easily measured 20 feet in length and was thick as a tree trunk. The massive serpent had positioned itself with tactical precision, using the fallen tree's complex root system as an ambush site where unsuspecting prey would be forced into the open with limited escape routes. Bomani's curious nature and fearless exploration had led him directly into the python's killing zone, and now the ancient predator was employing the methodical constriction strategy that made these serpents among nature's most efficient killers. What made the scene even more heartbreaking was Bomani's obvious confusion and terror. The infant gorilla's dark eyes were wide with incomprehension as the python's coils tightened incrementally around his small body, each squeeze forcing weak whimpers that spoke of pain and fear beyond his young understanding. His tiny hands clawed helplessly at the smooth scales that held him in an inescapable prison of living muscle. Kondo and Naya circled the clearing's perimeter in complete helplessness, their massive frames trembling with frustration and parental anguish. Their intelligence allowed them to understand exactly what was happening, but their natural behavioral patterns provided no framework for confronting a 20-foot python whose crushing power could easily kill an adult gorilla if they attempted direct intervention. The python moved with the patience of a predator that understood time was its greatest weapon. Its diamond-patterned scales gleamed with muscular power as it maintained steady pressure on Bomani's ribcage, waiting for the inevitable moment when the infant could no longer draw breath. The serpent's cold, unblinking eyes showed no emotion as it calculated the precise amount of pressure needed to subdue its prey without damaging the meal to come.
Most devastating was the systematic nature of the attack. This wasn't random predation. This was calculated exploitation of an infant's natural curiosity by a predator whose evolutionary programming had perfected ambush tactics over millions of years. Every element of the python's positioning and technique spoke of intelligence that had learned to exploit the behavioral patterns of its prey with deadly efficiency.
The sight before him triggered something profound within Dr. Mbongo's consciousness, an emotional response that transcended his professional training and reached directly into the deepest core of his humanity. Omani's weak whimpers and the desperate anguish in Kondo and Naya's eyes seemed to bypass every scientific protocol he had learned, appealing directly to protective instincts that had nothing to do with research ethics and everything to do with basic moral courage. Standing at the clearing's edge, Dr. Mbongo found himself facing an impossible situation that went far beyond his expertise as behavioral researcher. The 20-foot python represented a formidable opponent even for armed professionals with specialized equipment. Its crushing coils could easily break human bones, and its defensive strikes could deliver devastating injuries to anyone attempting intervention without proper tools or backup support. More critically, any aggressive approach might cause the serpent to tighten its grip fatally, ending Bomani's life in seconds rather than the minutes that remained if the constrictive pressure continued at its current pace. Dr. Mbongo's years of studying python behavior told him that the infant was already showing signs of respiratory distress that indicated very little time remained before irreversible damage occurred. Yet something deeper than logic was driving his response. The sight of Kondo and Naya's helpless circling and their obvious emotional devastation was triggering protective responses that transcended species boundaries. These weren't just research subjects. They were individuals he had known for years, whose family dynamics he understood as intimately as human relationships. The most devastating aspect of the situation was the complete inadequacy of his equipment for serpent rescue operations. His research gear contained cameras, communication devices, and basic medical supplies, but nothing designed for confronting massive constrictors in active feeding behavior. His satellite phone might not penetrate the dense canopy effectively enough to summon help that could arrive in time. Dr. Mbongo found himself crossing a psychological boundary that separated professional wildlife observation from personal moral intervention. The sight of Bomani's systematic suffocation and his parents' helpless anguish was triggering responses he couldn't ignore, even if action meant risking everything he had built in 14 years of research work. Every second of hesitation meant continued suffering for a creature he had watched grow from birth, and conventional rescue seemed impossible without help that would arrive far too late. Dr. Mbongo transformed from passive observer to active catalyst when he made a desperate decision that abandoned every protocol in wildlife research ethics. He stepped into the clearing and began approaching the python with nothing but a sturdy branch and 14 years of understanding gorilla psychology to guide his actions. His choice was calculated but desperate. If he was going to intervene, he needed Kondo and Naya to understand that he was there to help, not compete for territory. Speaking in the soft, rhythmic vocalizations he had learned from years of gorilla observation, Dr. Mbongo announced his presence to the distraught parents while keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The remarkable moment came when Kondo, instead of displaying territorial aggression toward a human in his family's crisis zone, seemed to recognize Dr. Mbongo's intent and actually moved aside to give him clearer access to the python. Working with practiced efficiency born of countless field emergencies,
Dr. Mbongo activated his emergency beacon and began transmitting distress signals, knowing that conventional rescue would take hours while Bomani had minutes. His satellite communication equipment sent coordinates to park authorities, but the immediate crisis required action that couldn't wait for backup. The breakthrough moment came when Dr. Mbongo began using the sturdy branch to probe the python's coils, looking for pressure points that might force the serpent to loosen its grip without triggering a fatal constriction response. His years of studying snake behavior in research contexts had taught him that pythons could be manipulated through strategic pressure application, but he had never attempted this knowledge in a life-or-death situation. What happened next defied every assumption about interspecies cooperation. Kondo, observing Dr. Mbongo's tactical approach, began coordinating his own movements to support the human's efforts. The massive gorilla positioned himself to block the python's potential escape routes while making threatening displays that forced the serpent to divide its attention between maintaining its grip on Bomani and defending against multiple perceived threats. Naya joined the coordinated effort by creating distracting movements from the opposite side, establishing the most unlikely rescue team ever documented in primatology research. The three-way cooperation between two gorillas and one human created pressure that began forcing the python to reconsider its tactical position. The coordinated rescue effort that unfolded challenged every principle of wildlife behavior Dr. Mbongo had studied throughout his career. Working in unprecedented harmony with Condola and Naya, he applied strategic pressure to the python's midsection, while the gorilla parents created diversions that forced the massive serpent to divide its attention between multiple threats approaching from different angles. The breakthrough came when Dr. Mbongo's tactical probing found a vulnerable spot where the python's coils overlapped, creating a pressure point that forced the serpent to adjust its grip on Bomani. In that critical moment, Condola demonstrated intelligence that left the primatologist speechless. The massive gorilla coordinated his movements perfectly with Dr. Mbongo's efforts, applying pressure at exactly the right moment to maximize the effectiveness of their combined intervention. Working with split-second timing that seemed impossible between species that had never practiced such cooperation, the unlikely rescue team began systematically forcing the python to loosen its death grip. Each coordinated effort created small opportunities for Bomani to draw deeper breaths, buying precious time while they worked to free him from the serpent's coils. Dr. Mbongo's emergency communications had finally reached park authorities, and the distant sound of approaching helicopters indicated that professional rescue was en route. But the immediate crisis required continued coordination between human and gorilla that transcended every known boundary of interspecies cooperation. The critical moment arrived when the python, overwhelmed by attacks from multiple directions and unable to maintain its tactical advantage, began releasing its coils to prepare for defensive action against its tormentors. Dr. Mbongo quickly moved to extract Bomani from the loosening grip, while Condola positioned himself to prevent the serpent from re-establishing its hold on the infant. As Bomani finally broke free from the python's deadly embrace, weak but breathing, the immediate danger seemed to have passed. The infant gorilla stumbled toward his parents while Dr. Mbongo backed away to give the family space for their reunion, believing that the crisis had been successfully resolved through their unprecedented cooperation. But what happened next would reveal that their intervention had triggered something in Condola that went far beyond gratitude or relief, something primal and terrifying that would challenge everything Dr. Mbongo thought he understood about gorilla psychology and the consequences of crossing species boundaries in moments of extreme stress.
What unfolded next would be remembered as one of the most terrifying displays of gorilla behavior ever documented. As Bomani reached safety, Kondo's demeanor underwent a transformation that left Dr. Mbongo frozen with horror.
The massive gorilla's eyes, which moments before had reflected cooperative intelligence, now blazed with something primal and utterly alien. Instead of the gratitude Dr. Mbongo expected, Kondo turned toward him with aggressive posturing that suggested the rescue had triggered territorial instincts beyond human comprehension. The gorilla's chest-beating display wasn't celebratory. It was a warning that the human had violated boundaries that couldn't be forgiven, regardless of good intentions. Naya joined her mate's threatening behavior, positioning herself to block Dr. Mbongo's escape routes while vocalizing with aggressive intensity that made the forest around them fall silent. The python, forgotten in the face of this new threat, slithered away while the gorilla family's focus shifted entirely to the human who had dared to intervene in their family crisis. Dr. Mbongo realized with growing terror that his act of heroism had awakened something in Kondo that viewed human intervention as the ultimate territorial violation, a transgression that demanded immediate and violent response regardless of the lives saved in the process.
Dr. Mbongo's survival depended on the arriving helicopter rescue team, whose intervention forced Kondo and Nakaya to retreat with their saved infant. The terrifying encounter left him with profound injuries and psychological trauma that ended his field research career, but alive to document behavior that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about gorilla psychology. What happened that day revealed the dangerous complexity of interspecies intervention. Kondo's violent response wasn't ingratitude, it was the awakening of ancient territorial instincts that viewed human involvement in family crises as existential threats requiring elimination. The rescue had saved Bomani, but triggered primal responses that transformed cooperative partners into deadly enemies within moments. Dr. Mbongo's documentation became crucial evidence for understanding the psychological boundaries that exist between humans and our closest relatives. His experience proved that even the most well-intentioned acts of heroism can unleash consequences beyond human prediction or control. Today, Bomani thrives in the wild, while Dr. Mbongo continues his research from safe distances, forever changed by the terrifying lesson that gorilla gratitude and gorilla rage can emerge from identical circumstances. Their story serves as a haunting reminder that crossing species boundaries, even to save lives, can awaken forces that challenge our understanding of animal consciousness and the true cost of intervention in the natural world.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.